The long gallery at Langfield Park held its breath in the late afternoon light, and Marguerite Vaillant stood beneath the ceiling medallion she had spent 3 years making perfect. Her brush set down for the last time. Gold dust still settled in the creases of her knuckles. She was 27 years old, the daughter of a Huguenot master gilder, and she had just completed the finest interior restoration in the county. 27 layers of gold leaf applied with a patience that most men could not have sustained for 27 days. The room behind her caught the winter light and threw it back in warm, burnished waves, and she was still looking up at the medallion, checking, as she always checked, for the seam that was never there, when she heard his footsteps on the parquet. Benedict Langfield, Duke of Meryton, entered the long gallery and did not look at the ceiling. He looked at her. Something in his voice was wrong before he had said a word. She read it in the set of his jaw, in the way his hands were not at his sides, but held slightly forward, as if he were preparing to catch something or to push it away. She had known this man for 3 years. She had learned to read the room by reading him first, and what she read now made her set down the chamois cloth she was holding and turn to face him fully. "We need to discuss the commission," Benedict said, "before the royal visit." Marguerite waited. "It is not about the technique," he said. "Then say what you mean, Benedict." He looked at the medallion. He looked at the cornice she had gilded on a ladder in November, in cold that made the leaf stick to her fingers. He looked at the floor she had refinished on her hands and knees in the second winter, matching the original pigment so precisely that the estate surveyor had spent an hour looking for the join. He looked at everything in the room except her face, and then he looked at her face, and he said it. "You were convenient." The words landed in the gilded air and did not echo. They did not need to. Marguerite did not flinch. She did not weep or shout or take a step backward. She looked at him for 4 seconds, long enough to read the surface and the layer beneath it, the calculation and the shame that had not yet arrived, but would, the fear that had spoken before anything honest could. And then she turned. She walked to the door at the gallery's far end. She opened it. She did not close it behind her. The silence she left was worse than any door could have been. It was gallery length, amplified by the tick of the bracket clock on the south wall and the soft creak of gilded wood settling in the cold. Benedict stood in the long gallery, alone, in a room so beautiful it was painful to look at, surrounded by the evidence of her hands. The silence held. It held him there in it, and it did not let go. 6 hours earlier, the Morning Post had arrived at Langfield Park with a confirmation letter from the Lord Chamberlain's office, and Mr. Harrington, the estate steward, had brought it to Benedict in the library, with the particular expression he reserved for news that was simultaneously excellent and complicated. The royal household would send an advance representative within the month. The Long Gallery, restored under the Duke of Meryton's patronage, had been selected as a model of private conservation for the household's consideration. Benedict had read the letter twice. He was still holding it when Lady Phoebe Langfield arrived. Phoebe was 31, his cousin, widowed at 28, and the most politically intelligent person in the family. Which was not, Benedict sometimes reflected, the same as the most honest. She came into the library without knocking, which she had always done, and she sat in the chair across from his desk without being invited, which she had always done, and she looked at the letter in his hand with an expression of careful neutrality that he had learned, over the years, to distrust. "You have seen the confirmation," she said. "This morning," he replied. "Then you understand what it means." Phoebe folded her hands in her lap. "The royal household will send someone. that someone will ask who restored the gallery, and you will have to explain that the Duke of Meryton's most trusted companion for 3 years, the person whose name is attached to the finest room in this house, is the daughter of a Huguenot tradesman. Benedict set the letter down. Marguerite Vaillant is the finest restorer in the county. I do not dispute her skill, Phoebe said, with the tone of a woman who was about to dispute everything adjacent to the skill. I dispute the presentation. Every paper in London will note it, Benedict. The Duke, whose most trusted companion, is a gilder's daughter. At a royal visit, with the household watching. She completed the medallion last week. The work is extraordinary. The work is irrelevant to what I am describing. Phoebe's voice was patient, which was always more dangerous than when she was impatient. You are not being judged on the ceiling. You are being judged on your choices. And the choice to keep a tradeswoman in that position, to present her as your restorer before the crown, that choice will follow your name into every drawing room in England. Benedict stood and walked to the window. Outside, the park lay frost-pale in the winter morning, and he could see, if he looked at the right angle, the light from the long gallery where Marguerite was working. He had been able to find that light for 3 years without trying. She finishes today, he said. Then today is the time, Phoebe said, and waited. He did not refuse her. He stood at the window for another 30 seconds, and he did not refuse her. And Phoebe knew what that meant, and she left him to it. That afternoon, Benedict found Marguerite in the long gallery making her final checks. She was on the short ladder at the east cornice, a hand lens pressed to the gilded acanthus, and she did not hear him come in. He stood for a moment watching her work, the particular focus she brought to the smallest detail, the way her whole body organized itself around the task. And then he rehearsed, silently, the sentence Phoebe had given him. It was a clean sentence. It left nothing open. He said it when she had descended the ladder and set down the lens. He said it to her face, because he was, at least, not a coward about the delivery. And she looked at him for 4 seconds and left, and the gallery held him in the quiet she made. In the kitchen corridor, Marguerite packed her tools with the methodical care she had learned from her father. Each brush wrapped in cloth, each solvent bottle stoppered and set upright, the hand lens in its leather case. Mrs. Harrington, the housekeeper, found her there and stood in the doorway, with the expression of a woman who wished very much that she were somewhere else. Miss Vaillant, Mrs. Harrington said, the Duke did not mean, he meant it exactly, Marguerite said, without looking up from the brush she was wrapping. That is the problem. She lifted the wooden case, settled its weight against her hip, and walked out through the kitchen door into the cold. That evening, Mr. Harrington knocked at the library door and entered to find Benedict standing at the window in the dark. The confirmation letter still on the desk where he had left it that morning. Your Grace, Harrington said. The advance representative from the royal household arrived this afternoon. I showed him the long gallery. Benedict did not turn from the window. He spent 40 minutes in the room. Harrington continued. He asked to meet the restorer. He said, Harrington paused, with the care of a man delivering information he knew would wound. He said the gallery is the finest restoration in England. He asked for her name. I gave it. Benedict was quiet for a moment. Then, what did he say? He said, remember it. The fire in the grate was the only sound in the room. Benedict remained at the window, looking out at the park, at the long gallery where no light burned now, and said nothing at all. 3 days later, Marguerite arrived at Mrs. Thorne's gilding workshop in Milford and asked for bench space. Mrs. Thorne was 54, broad-shouldered, with hands that carried the particular coloring of a woman who had worked with gold leaf since she was 12. She had trained Marguerite's father, and she had watched Marguerite grow up in the smell of size and solvent. And she looked at her now across the workshop bench with an expression that was equal parts assessment and something warmer. "Bench space?" Mrs. Thorne repeated. "I need somewhere to work," Marguerite said. "You need more than bench space. You need work." Mrs. Thorne moved a row of sample boards aside and set her elbows on the bench. "The church warden at St. Clement's came to me last month. The medieval rood screen. It has not been touched in 60 years, and it needs someone who knows what they're looking at. I was going to take it myself, but my eyes are not what they were for the fine work." She looked at Marguerite steadily. "I am offering you the commission." Marguerite was quiet for a moment. "I need to work," she said, "not to be given work. There is a difference." "There is," Mrs. Thorne agreed. "The commission exists. The church warden is waiting. I am telling you about it because you are the right person, not because you need saving." She pushed a contract across the bench. "Sign it in your own name. I will witness it." Marguerite looked at the contract. At the line above the signature, Conservator, and below it, the space where a name would go. Her father's name had always been above hers on every document she had worked under. Jean-Claude Vaillant, master gilder, and below that, in smaller letters, with his daughter assisting. She picked up the pen. She signed it. Monsieur Vaillant, Conservator. Her hand was steady. She began at St. Clement's the following morning. The rood screen was older than anything at Langfield, carved from oak in the 14th century, and it asked more of her than the Long Gallery had. The Long Gallery had required precision and patience, and a thorough knowledge of period technique. The rood screen required all of that, and also a kind of listening. The ability to read 3 centuries of overpainting and understand what was underneath without disturbing it. Marguerite mixed her solvents on the workbench Mrs. Thorne had set up in the vestry, testing adhesion on small patches before committing to anything, working with a brush so fine it left a line no wider than a hair. Mrs. Thorne came twice a week to observe, and occasionally to correct, and once to sit quietly in the pew behind Marguerite for an hour without saying anything at all, which Marguerite recognized as the highest form of professional approval the older woman offered. At Langfield, meanwhile, Phoebe had installed Mr. Harwood, a restorer from Ipswich, whom she described as properly established, to complete what she called the final touches on the Long Gallery before the royal visit. Harwood was competent. He was not Marguerite. Benedict found this out when he walked the south cornice on a Tuesday morning and stopped at the 3rd acanthus leaf from the window. He stood there for a full minute before he called Harrington. "She tapered the acanthus," Benedict said when Harrington arrived. "You see how the edge runs to a point? Harwood squared it. Look at the difference." Harrington looked. "It is a very small difference, Your Grace." "It is the wrong difference." Phoebe arrived that afternoon and found Benedict still in the gallery. She looked at the cornice and then at him. "No one will notice," she said. "I notice," Benedict said, and walked away, and did not say anything further to her about it. He walked the Long Gallery every night that week. Not at any particular hour, sometimes at 11, once at 2 in the morning, and not with any particular purpose that he could have named. He was not contemplating. He was simply unable to remain in any other room in the house for more than an hour at a time, and the gallery, which had been the center of his daily life for 3 years, was the only place that felt large enough to contain the particular quality of his restlessness. On the fourth night, he found Harwood's desk, a portable writing slope set up in the gallery's east alcove, and saw Marguerite's conservation notebook sitting on top of a stack of estate documents. It was a small, leather-bound book, filled with her handwriting, pigment formulas, adhesion tests, sketches of the original surface layers, 3 years of technical observation that existed nowhere else. Harwood had apparently been consulting it and had set it aside to classify with the estate papers. Benedict took the notebook from the desk, wrapped it in a square of cloth, and rode to Milford the following morning. He left it on the workbench at Mrs. Thorne's workshop when no one was present, with no note. Phoebe's whisper campaign had begun by then. She was telling acquaintances, at the particular social gatherings where information moved fastest, that Miss Vaillant had left Langfield under a cloud and that her methods had been questioned by the estate surveyor. The story was not large enough to be called a lie, which was precisely what made it effective. Within a week, the county was discussing both Marguerite's departure and Benedict's judgment in the same breath, which had not been Phoebe's intention, but was its inevitable result. When you threw a stone at one person's reputation, the splash reached whoever was standing closest. Marguerite found her conservation notebook on the workbench one morning, wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully and found, on the cloth's inner surface, a trace of gold leaf residue. The particular warm yellow of the Langfield ceiling medallion, which used a specific alloy she had sourced from a supplier in Norwich, and which did not match any of the leaf in Mrs. Thorne's workshop. She held the cloth for a moment, then set it aside and said nothing to Mrs. Thorne. 3 weeks into the rude screen work, her solvent brush found something unexpected in the lower left panel. She had been working methodically through a section of overpainting that dated, by its medium, to a Victorian restoration, heavy oil paint applied with a broad brush, covering something older. She had known something was underneath. She had not known what. The shape that emerged beneath her brush was a hand, then a wing. Then, over the course of 3 careful days, an entire figure. An angel, blue-robed, the paint still vivid beneath 3 centuries of concealment. The gold of its halo intact, under the Victorian layer, in a way that suggested the Victorian restorer had known it was there and covered it deliberately, for reasons that would never now be known. "Mrs. Thorne," Marguerite said from the floor where she was kneeling with a magnifying lens, "I think I found something." Mrs. Thorne came and knelt beside her and looked for a long time without speaking. "A hidden panel," Marguerite said. "A medieval Annunciation. The azurite looks consistent with East Anglian workshops. The particular blue, the binding medium. Late 14th century, possibly." She paused. "What if it is not significant? What if I have—" "You did not stumble onto it," Mrs. Thorne said. "You worked for 3 weeks with a solvent brush, testing every square inch, because you knew something was there. You found it because you were looking." She sat back on her heels. "It is significant, and you are going to need Sir Hubert Dacre." Sir Hubert Dacre, president of the Antiquarian Society, arrived at St. Clement's on a Thursday morning with 2 assistants, a portable spectroscope, and the particular energy of a man who had been told something extraordinary and was prepared to be disappointed. He spent 2 full days examining the panel before he would speak to Marguerite about his conclusions. The authentication evening was a county event before anyone had organized it as one. The church warden had mentioned it to the parish council, who had mentioned it to the local newspaper. And by the time Marguerite arrived at St. Clement's to arrange her sample boards in the nave, there were 40 people expected. Her hands were shaking. She had laid out the boards, cross-sections of the paint layers, pigment samples, her binding medium analysis. And she was adjusting the display stand for the third time when the stand shifted and the ultramarine sample began to slide. Benedict entered through the side door. He crossed the nave in 4 steps, picked up the ultramarine sample, and held it steady while she righted the stand and secured it. His hand held her evidence still while hers worked. When the stand was secure, he set the sample back in its place and stepped away, and her hands had stopped shaking. They did not speak. The county gathered. Dacre took his position. Marguerite stood before 40 people and presented her findings: the pigment analysis, the binding medium, the azurite underlayer, the cross-referencing with the Fitzwilliam collection samples that confirmed the East Anglian workshop tradition. Her voice was steady because she had practiced it until it was steady. Her hands, visible to everyone, were shaking. And she did not hide them, because hiding them would have cost attention she needed for the evidence. Dacre interrupted her at the dating methodology. Your cross-reference with the Fitzwilliam samples? You are arguing from analogy, not direct provenance. What is your basis for the 1380s specifically? The azurite underlayer, Marguerite said. The particular preparation method, the particle size, the oil content. Matches samples from the Fitzwilliams' documented East Anglian works from 1375 to 1395. The Victorian overpainting uses a lead white that was not commercially available in its current form before 1840, which gives us the upper boundary for the concealment. The lower boundary is the azurite preparation. I have the comparison charts here. She turned to the second board. The match is not analogical. It is compositional. Dacre examined the charts for a long moment. The room was entirely still. Miss Vaillant, Dacre said at last, your conservation method preserved details that a less careful hand would have destroyed. What you have uncovered here is the most significant ecclesiastical find in this county in 40 years. He paused. I stand by the 1380s. The evidence is sound. Marguerite thanked Dacre and Mrs. Thorne and the churchwarden. She looked once at the back pew where Benedict sat, and then she looked away and thanked the parish council, and she did not thank the Duke of Meryton. The room emptied slowly. Mrs. Thorne lingered long enough to press Marguerite's arm once, firmly, and then left. Marguerite began packing her instruments. She heard the church quiet itself around her. The last voices outside, the door closing, the particular stillness of a medieval building at night. And she was latching the instrument case when she heard Benedict's footstep in the aisle. The panel is extraordinary, he said. Thank you, Your Grace. The formality was deliberate, and he heard it. Miss Vaillant? He stopped several feet away, which was the distance of a man who understood he had no right to close it. The Crown remembered your name. Mr. Harrington told the royal visitor. He said the gallery is the finest restoration in England. He asked for your name. Marguerite set down the instrument case and looked at him directly. And you threw it away? He answered quietly. Yes. You threw it away because Phoebe told you I would embarrass you before the royal household. You chose her fear over 3 years of evidence that I was the best thing in your house. His voice was low. Yes. Then you tried to buy it back. She did not raise her voice. The steadiness of it was worse than anger would have been. A commission with your name on it. Ducal sponsorship. As if my work needed your seal to be real. I thought I was helping. You thought you were still the patron. That is not helping. That is reflex. She picked up the instrument case again. You cannot stop owning things, Benedict. You owned my commission for 3 years. You owned my dismissal. Then you tried to own my recovery, and I returned the letter because I am done being a line in your accounts." He was quiet. His hands were at his sides, and the restlessness she had always read in him had drained into something heavier and harder to name. "The Crown remembered my name without your help," Marguerite said. "Decker authenticated my panel without your funding. Mrs. Thorne gave me bench space without your permission. Everything I have built in the last 4 months, I built without you. That is not spite, that is proof. What would you have me do?" "Nothing," she said. "That is the point. You do not know how to do nothing. You commission, you patronize, you arrange. Stop arranging." She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "I work on the North Aisle tracery on Wednesdays. I am here at 2 o'clock. If you want to be in a room with me, come and sit in the pew and watch. Bring nothing. Say nothing useful. If you can learn to be present without owning what you see, then perhaps." She left. The door closed behind her, not a slam. A click. Precise and final as the last layer of gold leaf set perfectly against a surface. The letter had arrived at the Antiquarian Society 3 days before the authentication evening. Benedict had written it privately, requesting that the Society fund a full conservation program at St. Clément's, with Marguerite named as lead conservator under ducal sponsorship. He had believed, when he wrote it, that he was correcting something. The letter reached Marguerite before it reached Decker. She read the first paragraph, her hands going still against the paper, and then she set it down and did not read the rest. She wrote one line on a fresh sheet. "I do not accept commissions from men who dismissed me for being inconvenient. I accept commissions from church wardens," and sent it back unopened. The refusal reached the county within days. Phoebe was at a dinner party when she heard it, and she set down her wine glass with the particular care of a woman who had just been given exactly the ammunition she needed. The Duke offered the girl the opportunity of a lifetime. Phoebe said, "To the table at large," and she threw it back in his face. I am afraid that tells us everything we need to know about the gratitude of tradespeople. Dacre, who heard the story secondhand, wrote to Marguerite directly. "The funding is welcome. Your name requires no sponsor." She read that letter twice, folded it, and put it in the pocket of her work apron. That night, Benedict found his way to St. Clement's. It was not Wednesday, and he had not been invited, and he knew both of these things. Marguerite was sitting in the nave with a returned commission letter on the pew beside her, and she looked up when he entered, but did not stand. He stopped in the aisle. He looked at the letter on the pew. He looked at her. "I returned it," she said, "because you cannot stop owning things." "I know," he said. "You do not know. If you knew, you would not have written it." She was not angry in the way that shouts. She was angry in the way that goes quiet and still and says exactly what it means. "You dismissed me so that I would not embarrass you before the Crown. Then, when my work embarrassed you in the opposite direction, when it turned out to be extraordinary without your name on it, you tried to put your name back on it. That is not generosity. That is the same reflex." Benedict looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she had not expected. He went down on one knee in the aisle. Not a proposal, the posture of a man making himself lower, putting himself beneath the level of the conversation, because he had run out of other ways to show that he understood the distance. "Then tell me what the opposite of a cage looks like," he said, "because I do not know. I have only ever built cages and called them rooms." Marguerite was still for a moment. Then she reached down and took his hand and held it. 10 seconds, her fingers closed over his, neither pulling him up nor pushing him away. Then she released it and stood. "The opposite of a cage," she said, "is an open door that you do not walk through." She walked out through the open door. He came to St. Clement's the following Wednesday at 2 o'clock. He sat in the third pew from the front. He brought nothing. Marguerite did not acknowledge him. She worked on the north aisle tracery, a section of carved stonework that needed careful cleaning and consolidation, a task that required a soft brush and a great deal of patience and no conversation whatsoever. Benedict sat for 3 hours. When she began to pack up at 5 o'clock, he stood, and she did not look at him, and he left. The second Wednesday, she dropped a brush from the top of the short ladder. It fell to the stone floor and bounced once. Benedict picked it up before she had descended 2 rungs. He held it out, handle first, which was correct. She took it from his hand without looking at him. Their fingers did not touch. The third Wednesday, she was at the workbench mixing limewash, and she spoke without looking up. "The ratio is 5 to 1, she said. "Lime putty to water. Your plasterer at Langfield has been using 4 to 1. That is why the north corridor is developing cracks along the cornice joins." Benedict was quiet for a moment. "I will tell him." "You should." She went back to mixing. The fourth Wednesday, she was on the ladder at the upper tracery with the chisel, and she needed it moved 6 inches to the left where she could reach it. She looked down. "Handle first," she said. He passed it up handle first. She took it, looked down at him. "Handle first." "I learned," he said. "Slowly." "Slowly," he agreed. At the end of the session, she descended and stood at the workbench with her back to him, cleaning the chisel. "You have not commissioned anything," she said. "No," he replied. "You have not sent letters through Mrs. Thorne." "No," he said again. "You have not arranged anything." She set the chisel down. 4 weeks? "I sat in a pew," he said. "For 4 weeks. I did nothing. It is the hardest thing I have ever done." She was quiet for a moment. "Harder than dismissing me?" "Dismissing you took 1 sentence and destroyed everything. Sitting still takes the whole afternoon and builds nothing, except, I hope, the possibility that you might believe I can be in a room without trying to own it." She set down the cleaning cloth. "Handle toward him?" "That took 4 weeks." "It took 4 weeks to do," he said. "It took 4 months to understand why it mattered." The 5th Wednesday, she showed him the limewash technique. "Come here," she said, which were the most direct words she had spoken to him in 10 weeks. He crossed to the section of wall she was working on. She put the brush in his hand, and then she put her hand over his. Fingers over his fingers, adjusting his grip, showing him the angle. "Lighter," she said. "You are pressing like a man who grips a rein. This is plaster, not a horse." His hand under hers, learning the pressure. She guided him through the stroke, the particular sweep that deposited the limewash evenly without dragging. She did not let go for 3 seconds longer than the instruction required. He did not move his hand. "You are teaching me," he said. "I am correcting your technique. There is a difference." "There is always a difference with you," he said. "I am learning to hear them." She released his hand and returned to the section she had been working on. But she moved her stool 2 inches closer to the wall where he stood, and they both noticed it. And neither of them said anything about it. At the end of the session, she was cleaning brushes at the workbench, and he was standing by the rood screen, looking at the Annunciation panel that had made the county talk for 6 weeks. She crossed to him. She took his right hand and turned it palm up, and she ran her thumb across the base of his palm, the place where, 2 years ago, a sheet of gold leaf had landed and left its trace, and where the residue had long since washed away, but the memory had not. She pressed her lips to his palm. A single, deliberate moment. He closed his fingers over the place she had kissed and held it there. Autumn came to Milford in the particular way of English autumns, gradually, then all at once, the light going amber and the mornings arriving cold. The North Aisle tracery at St. Clement's was complete, and the conservation record showed it signed in full. M. Vaillant, Conservator. The Antiquarian Society had published Dacre's report in September. 3 commissions had arrived since then. From a Lord Adderley in Gloucestershire, from a cathedral chapter in Norfolk, from a private family in Bath with a Jacobean plasterwork ceiling that needed someone who understood the period. Marguerite had hired an apprentice. Nell, 15, the sexton's daughter, who had been watching from the church doorway for 6 weeks before Marguerite had asked her to come in and hold the brush. On a Saturday morning, not Wednesday, Benedict arrived at St. Clement's and found Marguerite sitting in the 3rd pew from the front, looking up at the North Aisle tracery from the angle he had occupied for 5 weeks. "You are in my pew," he said. "I wanted to see what you saw." He sat down beside her. "What did you see?" "A woman working," she said. "Not performing for anyone, not waiting for a verdict, just working." She looked at the tracery for a moment. "I think that is what frightened you most, that I did not need an audience." He reached into his coat and set a glass bottle on the wooden pew between them. Small, round, the glass catching the light through the window she had restored. Cold-pressed linseed oil. Not tin, glass, because she had said once, in the 2nd year at Langfield, that everything has a flavor to someone who pays attention, and good linseed oil in glass keeps its flavor where tin corrupts it. "You remembered," she said. "You said everything has flavor to someone who pays attention." "I have been paying attention." "For 5 weeks." "For 5 weeks consciously," he said. "For 3 years without knowing what I was doing." She picked up the bottle and held it to the light through the tracery, the oil catching the autumn color, amber and clear. "I am leaving for Gloucestershire in January. Lord Adderley's Manor, Tudor plasterwork, 4 months. Will you write?" She set the bottle down on the pew. "I will write about plasterwork, lime ratios, aggregate composition, the particular problem of 16th century hair plaster in damp conditions. If you can tolerate letters that contain more technical specification than sentiment, you may reply." "I tolerated 4 weeks of silence," he said. "I can tolerate lime ratios." His hand rested on the wood. She placed hers beside it, not touching. The width of the linseed oil bottle between their fingers, the glass catching the light between them. "You are not forgiven," she said. "I know," he answered. "But you are present." She looked at the tracery she had restored. The carved stone cleaned back to its original surface, every detail intact. "For the first time since I have known you, you are in a room without trying to arrange it. That is worth something." "What is it worth?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the light through the window, at the gold the autumn threw across the floor of a church that was older than either of them and would outlast them both. "Wednesdays," she said. "For now." Outside in the workshop, Nell was sweeping the floor with a wide broom, and the gold dust rose from the boards in the draught from the open door, rising, catching the morning light, then settling again on the bench and the tools and the sample boards and everything in a gilder's world. It never entirely washed off. It was not meant to.